They doubted her strength before the mission even began. The whispers started in the barracks, in the hushed tones of men who had seen too many battles, too many bodies broken, too many rookies sent home in pieces. She was the medic, and to them, that title alone carried a weight of weakness. In their eyes, medics patched wounds, carried bags of bandages, and ran only when the fight was over. They didn't fight. They didn't endure. They didn't belong shoulder to shoulder with the SEALs who lived in the fire. Every morning, as she laced her boots, she could feel their stares. Not always cruel, but always doubtful. They questioned how long she'd last under the desert sun, how long she'd endure the endless drills. The forced marches with packs heavier than her frame suggested she could carry. The quiet bets went around like smuggled cigarettes. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month before she washed out, before she was sent back with a polite dismissal. They didn't say it to her face, but she knew. She could see it in the way their eyes slid past her, in the way conversations ended when she walked into the room, in the way her presence was tolerated rather than trusted. But she didn't crumble. She never answered their doubts with words. Instead, she pushed harder. Every obstacle course, every midnight drill, every mile run until her lungs burned, she treated like a silent war. Her silence became her weapon. While others muttered about her weakness, she let the sound of her boots striking the ground become her reply. While some expected her to beg for help, she learned to carry the extra weight without complaint. She bound her hands when they tore open, wrapped her knees when they buckled, and refused to let anyone see the pain that clawed at her body when the lights went out. Still, the doubts followed her like shadows. In the planning rooms, when operations were drawn on sand tables, there were the faint smirks, the raised brows. Would she slow them down? Could she keep up when the bullets started flying? She wasn't just fighting to prove herself capable. She was fighting against the invisible wall of disbelief that grew thicker each day. And disbelief has a way of infecting even the strongest teams. Some of them didn't trust her to cover them, didn't trust her to drag them out if their legs failed in the mud or if shrapnel tore through their flesh. That trust, the kind that men built over years of shared blood and scars, wasn't offered to her. It had to be earned, and they expected her to fail before she could claim it. She heard the stories they told. Stories of past medics who cracked under the pressure, who froze when they had to run into gunfire, who stayed hidden while others bled out. Every whispered anecdote was a prophecy laid against her, as though she were destined to become another cautionary tale. They didn't say it out loud, but the thought was always there. She won't last. And yet, beneath their skepticism, something in her simmered, a fire that no amount of doubt could put out. She wasn't blind to their mistrust. She wasn't immune to the sting of it. But each cutting glance, each offhand remark, each sigh of impatience when she stumbled under the weight of her gear, those became fuel. She trained her body past its breaking point not because she needed to prove them wrong, but because she had to prove to herself that she belonged in the chaos where others feared she'd shatter. When she lay awake at night, the sounds of restless barracks around her, she thought of the faces she might one day have to save. She pictured their blood on her hands, their breaths fading in the dirt, and her being the only line between life and death. She didn't need their approval. She needed the strength to make sure that when the moment came, she wouldn't falter. The irony was, in trying so hard to push her out with their doubts, they only sharpened her resolve. The more they dismissed her, the more she built armor inside herself, an unspoken promise that when the time came, she would not be the one to crumble. She would stand where they least expected her to, and she would hold when no one believed she could. Chaos erupted. Gunfire, explosions, and wounded SEALs pinned down. The night had been still only moments before, a silence so tense it pressed against the ears. Then, like a dam breaking, the world shattered. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness, the sharp crack of rifles slicing through the humid air, and the heavy thud of mortars striking too close. Dirt and smoke filled the lungs, choking every breath. The team was caught in the open, pinned against jagged rocks and shallow cover that offered no safety from the relentless storm. The plan had been clean on paper, precise lines drawn across maps in the sterile glow of briefing rooms. But plans have a way of unraveling when the enemy isn't where they're supposed to be. The ambush had come fast, like a predator waiting in the shadows. They were surrounded, their exit routes cut off by an enemy that knew the ground better than they did. In an instant, the order and discipline of the mission dissolved into chaos, the kind of chaos that tears apart even the most seasoned warriors. Rounds snapped past ears, ricocheting off stone, showering sparks into the night. Men shouted over the roar, voices raw with urgency. Calls for suppression, calls for direction, calls for a medic. The air was thick with sound, deafening and disorienting. Somewhere in the haze, a grenade detonated, lifting the earth itself and slamming bodies back into the dirt. The night was no longer black. It was painted in fire, smoke, and flashes of terror. Pinned in that chaos, the SEALs tried to return fire, their training kicking in even as the ground seemed to vanish beneath them. But even the best marksmen struggled under the weight of surprise, and the enemy pressed harder, pouring bullets into their position. Wounded groans began to rise between the cracks of gunfire. A man down meant the whole team slowed, and now there were more than one. Blood stained the rocks, dark and glistening under the flickering light of explosions. The medic heard it all, the desperate cries, the guttural sounds of pain that no soldier ever forgets. Every instinct screamed to move, to reach them, to stop the bleeding before it was too late. But moving meant breaking cover, stepping into the open where every shadow hid a rifle trained to kill. To move was to gamble with death, and the odds were stacked high against her. Still, hesitation wasn't an option. She pressed her body against the dirt, heart hammering against her ribs as the ground shook beneath the pounding of mortars. Her hands trembled for a fraction of a second before steadying, gripping her pack tighter. Training wasn't about calm. It was about control in the storm. Every second counted. Every delay meant blood lost that could never be replaced. The shouts grew louder. A SEAL called out in pain, his voice ragged, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Another's rifle fell silent, replaced by a cough that sprayed red into the dirt. The medic's mind raced, cataloging the injuries she hadn't even seen yet, hearing the symptoms in their voices, imagining where the bullets had struck, how deep, how bad. Her body moved before her thoughts finished forming. Crawling low, pressing her face into the earth, she dragged herself forward into the storm. Explosions carved the night open again and again, each one threatening to tear her apart before she even reached them. But her focus narrowed, vision tunneling past the fire and smoke to the outlines of the fallen. She saw the silhouettes of men who had doubted her, men who had believed she wouldn't last. Now they lay bleeding, and she was the only line between their lives and the darkness closing in. Chaos didn't care who was strong, who was weak, who had doubted or believed. It swallowed everyone the same. But in that chaos, with bullets sparking off stone and screams tearing through the night, she moved with a determination no one had expected. She wasn't fast enough to dodge every round, wasn't shielded by anything but the dirt clinging to her skin, but she pushed forward, inch by inch, closer to the wounded voices calling out through the fire. One medic, alone, ran into the kill zone without hesitation. The field was alive with fire, bullets cracking so close they snapped the air beside her head. Each step felt stolen, borrowed against time, yet her stride didn't falter. While others clung to the fragile shelter of broken walls and rocks, she moved forward, her silhouette exposed against the chaos. Her pack bounced against her shoulders, stuffed with gauze, tourniquets, morphine, lifelines crammed into canvas, and every ounce of it felt like it weighed nothing compared to the urgency pressing her forward. Her boots struck ground churned by explosions, soil blackened and burning under the constant rain of enemy fire. There was no path, only a battlefield scattered with fragments of stone and shards of shrapnel still hot to the touch. The night was alive with sound. The screams of the wounded, the staccato of machine guns, the pounding in her own chest. But she had no time to process fear. Fear was a luxury. Hesitation was death. The kill zone stretched before her, a strip of earth no one wanted to cross. Men had been caught there, dropped in seconds, their cries silenced by the invisible lines of fire that cut the ground apart. It was where the enemy's bullets converged, where survival was least likely. And yet, she charged into it as though her body wasn't flesh but steel. Not because she was fearless, but because fear had no weight compared to the lives bleeding out ahead of her. Each movement was calculated in an instant. Drop low, roll left, sprint 3 steps, flatten against the dirt. She became a shadow slipping between bursts of gunfire, her hands moving as quickly as her legs, pushing her body onward. Dirt filled her mouth, dust stung her eyes, but she kept her focus locked on the outlines of the fallen. A seal lay sprawled ahead, motionless except for the faint twitch of his arm. She reached him, sliding into the dirt at his side, her hands already pulling her pack around, ripping open supplies. The smell of blood mixed with the stench of gunpowder. Her gloves were slick before she'd even unwrapped the bandages. She pressed hard against the wound, feeling the heat of life draining beneath her palms. There was no room for gentleness, only speed, only pressure strong enough to stop the river of red spilling into the earth. Around her, bullets struck sparks off stone, one grazing close enough to rip a strand of hair from her head. She didn't flinch. Her world shrank until there was only the wound, the man gasping under her grip, and the seconds slipping away like sand. When his breathing steadied, ragged, but still there, she knew she couldn't stop. Another voice shouted out in pain, louder this time, closer to panic. She tightened the bandage, forced the morphine into his arm, and moved again. She didn't crawl back to cover. She didn't wait for someone to drag him. She shouldered his weight, feeling her legs strain beneath the load, and dragged him across the dirt while the battlefield tried to erase them both. The enemy fire didn't pause for her. Tracers streaked through the air, glowing lines marking death's path across the field. Her breath came in bursts, her lungs aching with the weight of smoke, but she pulled him inch by inch until he was out of the worst of it. She could have stopped there, dropped to the ground and gasped for air, but another cry cut through the haze, and she turned back. The second SEAL was closer to the enemy lines, his blood painting the ground beneath him. Every rational thought told her the risk was too great, that she had already pushed too far. But rationality had no place in her world now. She sprinted, body low, pack slamming against her spine, and slid into the dirt beside him. His eyes were glassy, his breath shallow. She tore open his vest, found the wound, and pressed her fist against it with every ounce of strength she had left. His blood soaked through her sleeves, hot and heavy, but she refused to let her hands shake. Gunfire erupted so close the sound rattled her bones, but her focus was iron. She packed the wound, locked the tourniquet, forced air back into his lungs, and dragged him, too, through the kill zone's gauntlet. Alone, unprotected. Her body was a shield, her will the only armor against the storm. She dragged 3 SEALs out, bleeding, broken, but alive. The first had nearly gone limp in her arms, his weight heavy and unyielding, but she refused to let go. Her legs burned, her shoulders screamed under the strain, yet she clenched her teeth and pulled him through dirt that seemed endless. Every inch of ground gained felt like war against gravity, against time, against the bullets stitching the earth around her. Her boots slipped in the dust, her knees cracked against stone, but still she moved forward, her muscles fueled by something deeper than strength, a will that would not bend. When she brought him to relative safety, she didn't pause to breathe. The battlefield didn't grant her moments to gather herself. The next wounded man was waiting, his body racked with pain, his chest rising in shallow jerks that told her seconds mattered more than anything else. His blood painted the ground beneath him, and she could see the fear in his eyes, the desperate plea of someone who thought this was the end. She didn't give him time to despair. She pressed her hands hard against his wound, every movement deliberate and precise even as chaos raged around them. Her voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding, orders for him to breathe, to hold on, to fight. The second drag was harder. He was larger, heavier, his body twisting in agony with every pull. She hooked her arms beneath his shoulders, leaned back, and dragged with everything she had, her muscles screaming in protest. The dirt tore at her palms, her arms shook with exhaustion, but her resolve didn't falter. Gunfire chased her every movement, sparks flying as bullets slammed into the rocks just feet away, but she pulled him across the jagged ground until the shadows of her team reached out to help. The moment his body was handed off, she was already looking back to the kill zone, her eyes locked on the third man. He was the farthest, the most exposed. His body lay twisted near a crater carved by mortar fire, the ground around him scorched black and littered with fragments of steel. For anyone else, It would have been madness to attempt it, suicide to cross that open stretch again when the enemy's sights were fixed so tightly on it. But madness didn't stop her. She tightened the straps of her pack, dropped low to the ground, and sprinted back into the storm. The third SEAL didn't cry out. His silence was worse than screams. She slid beside him, her hands immediately moving to find the source of his bleeding. His pulse was faint, his skin pale beneath the grime. She worked faster than she thought possible, her training taking over as she sealed wounds, stopped bleeding, forced breath back into his failing body. Every second felt like balancing on a blade's edge, the world closing in, demanding she abandon him to save herself. But her decision had already been made the moment she ran. She would not leave him behind. Dragging him tested every limit she had left. His body was limp, dead weight that resisted every pull. She braced her feet against the dirt, leaned back with her whole body, and pulled him inch by inch through the unforgiving ground. Her lungs seared, her vision blurred, her arms trembled so violently she thought they might give out. But quitting was never an option. Each time her legs threatened to collapse, she found another reserve of strength hidden deep within her exhaustion. Her journey back felt endless. The ground stretched like a nightmare, every bullet that struck near her sounding like the hammer of fate. She stumbled once, fell hard onto her knees, pain shooting up her legs. But she refused to let go. She clawed the earth with her hands, dragging herself forward while pulling him with her, every motion a refusal to surrender. Her heart thundered in her ears, drowning out the battlefield, until all she could hear was the desperate rhythm of survival. When she crossed back into the relative safety of her team's position, her body nearly collapsed under the weight of him. Sweat poured down her face, streaking through dirt and blood, her chest heaving as though her lungs had been torn apart. But the three men lay behind her now, alive, breathing, rescued from the jaws of the kill zone by her hands alone. She had gone into the fire 3 times when once should have broken her, and she had pulled them all back, leaving no one to die alone in the dirt. Her courage silenced every critic who said she wouldn't last. The doubts that had clung to her since the first day, whispered in corners and traded like currency among the team, dissolved in the fire of that night. The men who once questioned her strength had watched with their own eyes as she broke through the kill zone again and again, dragging bodies heavier than her own, refusing to yield even when the earth itself seemed determined to stop her. Their disbelief had been loud before, a chorus of skepticism, but in the aftermath of her defiance, it was replaced by silence, the kind of silence born not from absence of words, but from the weight of undeniable truth. They had doubted her ability to keep up with the training. They had doubted her ability to carry the gear, to march the miles, to push through the punishing tests that forged warriors. And when the mission began, they had doubted her ability to endure the brutality of combat itself. To them, she had been fragile, untested, destined to crack under the first real taste of blood and chaos. Yet when the moment came, it wasn't the strongest among them who charged into the storm first, it was her. Courage has a way of rewriting the narrative. No speech, no argument, no declaration could have shifted their minds the way her actions did. On the battlefield, words mean nothing. Only survival, only deeds, only the raw truth of who steps forward when everyone else hesitates. And in that raw truth, she carved out a place that no amount of doubt could erase. The SEALs saw her covered in dust and blood, her uniform torn from crawling against stone, her face streaked with sweat and grit, but her eyes steady. She hadn't broken. She hadn't faltered. When others would have chosen safety, she chose fire. When others would have surrendered to the odds, she chose defiance. There was no more room for whispers in the barracks, no space left for quiet dismissals. The battlefield had burned their doubts away. Even those she had saved, men who had been among the loudest skeptics, felt the weight of her courage in their bones. They had looked up from the ground, bleeding and weak, only to see her hands pressing against their wounds, her arms dragging them from death's edge. They had felt her strength in the moments they were certain they would never open their eyes again. That kind of courage leaves an imprint deeper than scars. It cannot be questioned, because it has already spoken in the most absolute language, survival. Around the campfire later, when the chaos had subsided and the night was still again, there were no jokes at her expense, no muttered predictions of failure. Instead, there were glances, quiet, heavy, respectful. They didn't need to say it aloud. Warriors rarely do. Their silence was its own kind of acknowledgement. They had seen her do what few would dare, and in that, she had earned something greater than their approval. She had earned their trust. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it drags itself through the dirt, bleeding, exhausted, but unyielding. That was what they had seen in her. She had not been the loudest voice, not the strongest frame, not the most imposing presence. But courage isn't about appearances, it's about action. And her actions had carried more weight than any weapon they carried into the field. The same men who had once dismissed her now found themselves measuring their own strength against hers. They asked themselves, in the quiet of their own minds, whether they could have done what she had done, whether they would have charged into the kill zone alone, 3 times over. The uncomfortable truth for many was no, they would not have. And that truth made their silence even heavier. What once was doubt had transformed into something else, something unspoken but palpable. Every glance held the admission that she was no longer just the medic, no longer just the rookie, no longer just the question mark on the team. She had proven herself in a way so absolute that no further test was required. Her courage had silenced them all, not because she had demanded it, but because courage speaks in a voice louder than any critic, and its echo cannot be denied. That night, she didn't just save lives, she redefined what a medic could be. The lines that had once separated roles, expectations, and traditions were erased in the fire of her actions. Medics were supposed to patch wounds from the safety of cover, to provide care from behind the lines, to be the last line of defense when the battle was over. But she had shattered that definition, proving that courage, skill, and determination could transform anyone into more than the label they were given. Every step she took into the kill zone, every drop of sweat and blood that mixed with the dirt beneath her, challenged the old rules of what it meant to serve. She had become a force that refused to be contained by expectations, someone who could walk into the storm alone and emerge having changed the outcome for 3 men who might otherwise have been lost. Her actions created a new standard, one that no one in that team, or anyone who would hear the story later, could ignore. Her teammates had watched in disbelief, then awe, as she carried out what many had deemed impossible. The strength required was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and almost spiritual in its intensity. To face bullets, explosions, and the wails of the wounded without hesitation demands a kind of focus that transcends ordinary courage. She had to compartmentalize fear, pain, and exhaustion simultaneously, managing them so that they never broke her will. Every second she spent in that chaos demanded calculations too precise for anyone untested by combat. She became a living example of resilience. Each SEAL she dragged to safety was proof that limits exist only until someone decides to exceed them. Her hands, stained with blood and grit, were instruments of survival. Her eyes, sharp and scanning, measured danger while finding the faintest pulse, the shallowest breath, the signs of life that might have been overlooked. It was meticulous work under conditions no one should have endured, yet she persisted, refusing to let the chaos dictate her abilities or define her worth. Her courage had ripple effects. The men she saved carried not only their lives, but also a newfound respect for what a medic could do. They had trained for years, endured grueling missions, faced death repeatedly, and yet they had seen something in her that expanded their understanding of bravery. They realized that heroism is not about rank or role. It is about action when it matters most. And her actions had mattered with a force so profound that it would resonate long after the echoes of that firefight faded. Even those who doubted her before the mission could no longer contain their respect. Whispers of skepticism became stories of admiration. What had been a quiet undercurrent of disbelief transformed into lessons for the entire unit, a living demonstration that the conventional rules of combat roles could be rewritten. Medics could be more than caretakers. They could be the decisive factor in life and death moments. She had not only survived where others expected her to fail, she had thrived in the eye of the storm. Her body bore the marks of the night, bruises, cuts, dirt ingrained into skin and hair, muscles screaming in protest. But those marks were symbols, proof of what she had accomplished, evidence that her courage was not theoretical or abstract. It was real, measurable in lives saved, in hearts that continued to beat because of her presence. Every scratch, every muscle cramp, every aching joint was a testament to her refusal to yield, to her insistence on defining her own limits rather than letting others do it for her. And beyond the immediate battlefield, her example resonated as a statement about human potential. She had challenged the assumptions that limit people, that tell them who they can be or what they can achieve. She had rewritten the story for medics, for soldiers, for anyone who had been told they were too small, too weak, or too inexperienced to make a difference. Her courage was not merely an act of heroism. It was a redefinition of possibility itself. The transformation she enacted was subtle yet profound. The men she saved, the team she protected, and even the observers who would hear her story later would carry the impact forward. They would measure their own strength against the example she set. They would remember that a single person, armed with determination, skill, and unwavering resolve, could alter outcomes that seemed predetermined. She had not only pulled 3 lives from the brink of death, she had elevated the concept of a medic from caretaker to warrior, from support to hero, creating a legacy that could not be erased. Her actions that night transcended survival. They transcended the battlefield, the role of a medic, and the assumptions of those around her. She had shown what it truly meant to act without hesitation, to move with purpose under the harshest of conditions, and to redefine the boundaries of human courage. She had rewritten the expectations placed on her, proving that bravery is measured not by rank or title, but by the willingness to step into danger when others falter, to take responsibility when no one else can, and to ensure that life endures even in the face of overwhelming odds.